All right. Well, the Afghan Wigs. Josh, I'll admit that this is another one of these bands that I have always heard about. But for whatever, sometimes you get to a band and you listen to them, sometimes you don't. And for whatever reason, I just had never gotten around to
Yep.
listening to the Afghan Wigs. So that was my knowledge of this band. Did you have a relationship with them before this?
Nope, I'm in the exact same boat. I always heard the name and people really liking them and kind of having like a devoted following, but I never I never bothered listening
Yeah,
to them.
and let me do a roll call of, so there's some bands like Cop Shoot Cop that I wasn't even familiar with at all, that they existed, right? Like,
Yep.
and the first time I'm maybe hearing them is that. Then there's bands, and let's go ahead and run some of them on this podcast. Various things like the Stone Roses and Fugazi for me, and going back in time, the Modern Lovers, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's just a lot of these bands that we've covered. Suede a couple weeks ago, and
Yep.
I didn't know. And then there were and those were all bands, of course, I liked. And then there were some other ones that I'd heard of, and we hadn't, ever covered them. And it was like, okay, that wasn't as essential for me. And so this is always one of those. Do you mind if I take the first take on this one, Josh? Because
Oh no, by all means, go for it.
Yeah, so this was a really fucking good album, Josh. Like,
Yeah.
really, really good album.
Yep.
And the weakest part of this album for me is the singer's voice a little bit. It is not a great voice, I'd say. There are occasional songs where what it sounds like stretches a little bit into my enjoyment of the song. It takes me a tiny bit out of it, but boy, whenever it gets there, two things bring it back, Josh. This is a great guitar album.
Yes.
The choices of riffs and just the sound of the guitar is great, and the bass is so good on this album. Like, all of the guitar parts, the regular guitar and the bass, are just so strong on this. The hooks are golden on this album, and this is another one of these Goldilocks. Not necessarily for me necessarily, because I can far more lean into some of the directions, but I would guess for you, Josh, it might be a little Goldilocks, that there's just enough, feedbacky, distortion-y things from time to time here, right, to give you a taste of it, but stays out of the lane, probably to make that style of music a little bit more accessible. And so in some ways, it has a brief nod to like what we flirt with in things like Jesus and Mary Chain and stuff like that. But probably the best comparison for that for this so far of bands we've covered is the Stone Roses, which I mentioned before.
Yep.
But I like this album more than I liked the Stone Roses album. And there's a lot of similarities in terms of how I felt about this album to how I felt about the Suede album we did a couple weeks ago. They don't necessarily sound the same.
No, they don't.
Outside of the Britishness, I guess, of Suede, and then this being the Americanness, of the singing in this, right? Because are they from Ohio?
Cincinnati, I think.
Cincinnati, yeah. So there's stuff like that, but I'll expand on it as more. But like my first take, Josh, I want to hear from you. This is one of the better guitar rock albums we've covered in the '90s so far.
Oh yeah, I'm right with you. This is a great album. I was kind of blown away by the guitar on this, and you're right, it skirts that line between noise rock and just traditional guitar rock, and it also struck me as proto emo at times to me. The lyrics are pretty confessional and angsty and brooding, and I feel like there's definitely some like emo sounds or riffs that I've heard on other albums that are present on this.
For sure.
So that kind of also drew me in, because I'm kind of grew up listening to that type of music as well. And then I didn't have a problem with his voice. I thought it worked perfectly in concert with the way the guitar sound on this. The first 6 tracks or so.
It wasn't an impediment.
Yeah.
There just occasionally were times where I would have liked it to sound slightly different.
Yeah. It's it has great riffs, like you said, especially on songs like Gentlemen, Debonair,
which was the single off this album.
Yeah. It's clearly like, I don't know. Right away I knew it was a single. But the first 6 songs, I would say, are pretty unimpeachable for me. I really liked it.
Do you like the song that starts with "I got a dick for a brain," which made me laugh the first time?
I wrote that down. Got a dick for a brain, and my brain is going to sell my ass to you.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So it's those types of lyrics and kind of that self like effacement or kind of self-deprecation or, you know, kind of sad, borderline sad boy energy, or like self-hating
Yeah, but
energy.
it's not like a pathetic sad boy
No,
energy.
no.
Yeah.
It's like I don't know,
Self-aware
realistic.
sad
Yeah,
boy.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And that worked really well. On the song.
Well, and they're not asking anybody to feel sorry for them, which
No,
is what
no.
sad boy energy is sometimes. Like, oh, you know, the world's tough, feel sorry for me. This is more just like, you know, yeah, I'm going to say my emotions, but that's all right. They can stay here.
Yeah, it's like a weird, like, kind of masculinity that's like self-aware, but also matter of fact. I don't know. It is. You're right. It's like a different vibe. It's not. Sad in that way. The song "My Curse" brings in a female singer, which I thought was a really interesting and an excellent deviation from their album, because there is no kind of like backing singers on this album. It's just him and the guitar and the sounds, the bass and the percussion on this. And there is the drums are also excellent on this. I thought they complement the guitars really well. Songs like Fountain and Fairfax have these like pounding drums coupled with like a high guitar part and his yelling voice. It all kind of works really well together. And Now You Know has guitar with drums to start. But I was really
it's
impressed
like
by this album.
cascading drums.
Yeah,
it's cascading drums. I'd say just coming at you like a wave.
Yeah, that's a good word for it. But I really enjoyed this album throughout. I listened to it multiple times and never got old or boring. And it's a big like those albums that you listed. I wasn't as high on some of them as you, but they are, you know, I have my own discoveries as well. So it's up there in terms of like new material or new bands that are precious or you know, important or good discoveries ultimately.
Yeah, we talk a lot about albums that make you want to hear more from an artist and how that makes an album. We've used it for singles, but we've also used it for albums, and that kind of always elevates an album for us. And this is a very good example of that. After I listened to this, and I haven't yet, but I made a note to myself, like, I want to revisit this group because I want to hear what else they did.
Yep.
Because I enjoyed this as much as I did.
And this is their fourth album, so they have three more before this, obviously, and multiple albums after, I believe, as well. They kind of go on hiatus, I think, but then they reunite. It looks like they have at least 5 albums after this over the course of, to most recently, 2022. So more material to check out.
Yeah, easy thumbs up for me. This is going to be, I haven't given it its formal rating yet, but this is going to be pretty high in terms of score-wise for where we go. I also am nearly certain that our friend Matt will love this album. And if we direct him to one album this week, this is the one we should direct him to.
Yeah, he's probably familiar with Incesticide, but this is, I bet it'll be discovery for him as well.
Absolutely. And Josh, I did remember the name of the group who, going back to the Cop Shoots Cop, the Gun Club was a corollary singing-wise and structurally in terms of the sound. So that would be a comparative point that I would make. Yep. So
interesting.
File it away. Maybe we could tack that on to the episode so that it goes to the YouTube.
The birthday party just jumped into my head too. That was another kind of one of those abrasive, challenging albums at that time that we talked about.
Yeah, there's going to be a point where I'm going to have to go back to old post-punk flashcards and do a second listen of some of them, because I don't want to say they ran together because they don't totally run together, but some I feel like we're like, this is a challenging album, and we're kind of using them all shorthand, and I want to go back and do a little more differentiation. So maybe that's my weekend homework, Josh, is, you know, have a clear distinction of those the sort of noise rock, art rock challenging bands of the 70s and 80s with a re-listen.
Nice. So yeah, it's a good call.